They didn't end with a fight. They ended with silence. And that silence told the whole story. After 19 years together, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban didn't break down in front of cameras. They walked away with grace. No accusations, no blame. Just two souls quietly closing a chapter that once defined them. In a world where every breakup becomes a headline, their silence became something rarer. A message. Because sometimes love doesn't fail. It just finishes its song. When Nicole Kidman walked onto the red carpet just days after filing for divorce, there was something different in her presence. The dress was flawless, the smile was theirs, but the energy had shifted. It wasn't the poise of a movie star, it was the calm of a woman who had stopped pretending everything was fine. For nearly 20 years, she and Keith Urban had been the Hollywood love story that seemed to defy the odds. Two people who met later in life, found each other when both were bruised by the past, and built a life full of music, laughter, and hope. But behind that image of perfection was the quiet truth. Sometimes love doesn't fade. It just transforms into something you can't hold on to anymore. When news of their separation broke, it didn't explode in scandal or shouting headlines. It whispered. The words were simple. Nicole Kidman has filed for divorce after 19 years of marriage. There was no public statement, no interviews, and no blame. Just silence. The same kind of silence that had once protected them, now wrapping around the end of their story. Those close to Nicole say the shift began long before the paperwork. It wasn't one big fight or one heartbreaking betrayal. It was the slow unraveling that happens when two lives grow in different directions. Keith was touring, living the road life that comes with country music fame. Nicole was filming, often in other parts of the world. For a while, that distance was part of what kept them balanced. They'd always said that time apart made their reunion sweeter, but over time, the space stopped feeling romantic. It started feeling permanent. She once said in an interview, "When I love completely." That was Nicole. She poured herself into people, projects, and moments. But in recent years, something began to shift inside her. She started talking more about stillness, about inner peace, about how getting older meant understanding what kind of energy she wanted around her. Her friends describe her as intuitive, someone who can feel the temperature of a relationship without needing to talk about it. And that's what happened here. She could feel it. For years, they had been each other's greatest support system. Nicole had stood beside Keith during his hardest battles, and he had lifted her through the painful memories of the past she rarely spoke about. They had shared red carpets, late-night phone calls, and the kind of unspoken connection that only comes from truly being seen. But the truth is, even the strongest bond can bend under the weight of different dreams. Nicole was leaning more into her acting, chasing roles that challenged her emotionally, producing stories about women finding their strength. Keith, meanwhile, was chasing music. Nights filled with applause and adrenaline, songs written in hotel rooms far from home. What once connected them, their shared drive and passion, started to be the very thing that separated them. Yet even in that, there was no bitterness. Friends say the decision to separate wasn't sudden or angry. It was in many ways peaceful. Nicole had reached a point in her life where she understood that endings don't have to be failures. Sometimes they're simply new beginnings. It happened quietly. No shouting, no tears, just a moment of realization. One evening after wrapping a long shoot, Nicole came home to an empty house. Keith was on tour and the children were with family. She poured herself a glass of wine, walked onto the balcony, and just stood there, looking out at the city lights. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel everything. The exhaustion, the distance, the loneliness that had been tucked beneath red carpet smiles. She had spent so long being strong, being graceful, being the image of resilience. But that night, she admitted to herself that she was tired. Not of love, but of holding on to something that no longer felt alive. She didn't cry that night. She didn't need to. There was a strange peace that came with acceptance. She later told a close friend, "I realized I wasn't broken. I was just ready to stop pretending I was fine." And that was it. The beginning of the end. Not a scandal, not a betrayal. Just a quiet decision to choose herself. In the days that followed, Nicole moved with her signature grace. She filed the papers privately, avoided public comment, and focused on her children and her work. It wasn't about revenge or heartbreak. It was about self-respect. She's been through this before. Her first high-profile marriage taught her what it feels like to lose everything in front of the world. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't running from pain. She was walking toward peace. Those close to her say she found strength in simplicity. Morning walks, journaling, quiet dinners with friends. She wasn't searching for distraction. She was finding herself again. And when she finally stepped out for her first public appearance after the filing, in that elegant black gown, her head held high, the world saw it too. She wasn't the heartbroken woman the tabloids wanted her to be. She was radiant, grounded, and free. In a recent interview, Nicole spoke about her favorite part of growing older. You stop needing to prove who you are. You start living for peace, not validation. Those words hit differently now. They sound like the reflection of someone who has lived through the cycles of love, loss, and rebirth. Someone who knows that peace doesn't come from holding on, but from letting go with grace. Divorce isn't the end of her story. It's another chapter in a life that's been defined by resilience. Nicole has always turned pain into art. Whether it's through her roles on screen or her quiet philanthropy behind the scenes, she's built a career out of empathy, of feeling deeply even when it hurts. This new chapter is no different. She isn't hiding from her emotions. She's embracing them. What made the entire situation even more powerful was the silence, both hers and Keith's. No accusations, no interviews, no social media statements, just quiet. And in a world that feeds on drama, that silence was louder than any words could have been. It spoke of maturity, of mutual respect, of two people who once loved deeply and were now brave enough to walk separate paths. Behind the scenes, friends say there's still warmth between them. Not romantic, but respectful. They co-parent with understanding, they communicate when needed, and they've chosen not to let bitterness define their ending. That's rare in Hollywood. For Nicole, this isn't a tragedy, it's a transformation. She's entering a season of life where peace means more than perfection, where solitude isn't loneliness, but clarity. She's spoken before about how she believes every ending holds a lesson. "I don't regret love," she once said. "Even when it ends, it shapes who you are." And that's what makes her story so human. Beneath the fame and fortune is a woman who has faced heartbreak more than once and still chooses to believe in love, just differently now. The day after the divorce filing became public, Nicole went back to work. Not to escape, but because that's who she is. Her work has always been her anchor, her way of processing emotion. On set, she was described as focused and kind. No drama, no breakdowns. One crew member said, "She just carried herself with this incredible calm, like someone who had made peace with her decision." And maybe that's the truth. Maybe peace doesn't look like happiness at first. Maybe it looks like a woman standing in her power, knowing she chose herself without bitterness or regret. As she moves forward, Nicole isn't rushing into reinvention. She's simply living, taking time to heal, to travel, to be with her daughters. She's not hiding from the world. She's just engaging with it differently now, on her own terms. And for fans who followed her journey from heartbreak to healing, this moment feels like a full circle story. Not of loss, but of liberation. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing a woman can do is step out of a story that no longer fits and write a new one. And that's exactly what Nicole Kidman is doing. When Keith Urban finally stepped onto a stage after weeks of silence, the crowd cheered as if nothing had changed. But for those who knew him, really knew him, the change was unmistakable. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. His words came slower, softer. There was gratitude in his voice, but behind it, a kind of stillness that only comes when life has just been rewritten. He didn't mention Nicole's name. He didn't need to. Every song that night said what words couldn't. For 19 years, Keith and Nicole had shared something rare, a partnership that managed to survive fame, distance, and time. They had built a family, weathered storms, and reminded the world that love could thrive in an industry that often eats it alive. But love, no matter how beautiful, isn't always forever. So when the news broke that Nicole had filed for divorce, Keith chose the same thing she did: silence. It wasn't avoidance. It was grace. That silence became his statement. In the weeks that followed, he canceled interviews, stepped away from publicity, and retreated into music, the only language that had ever made sense to him. Those close to him said he spent most of his time in the studio, writing late into the night, letting melodies do what conversation couldn't. "He's processing it the way he always does," said one friend, "through sound, not speech." And when he finally returned to the stage, his setlist told a story. He opened with a song about starting over, about endings that don't destroy but rebuild. Between verses, he paused, just for a moment, eyes closed as the crowd sang the chorus back to him. The lights dimmed, and for a few seconds, the noise of the world fell away, leaving only his voice, his guitar, and the echo of something that once was. Those who were there said it was one of the most moving performances of his career. There were no tears, no dramatic gestures, just a man standing in front of thousands, saying goodbye in the only way he knew how. People often forget that behind every celebrity headline is a human story. Two people trying to find peace after love has run its course. For Keith, that meant reflection. He'd always been open about his struggles, his battles, his growth, his gratitude. But this time he chose quiet strength. Not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much to let the noise cheapen it. Friends said he was heartbroken, but not bitter. There was no anger, no blame, just a kind of deep acceptance that comes when you know something beautiful has ended exactly the way it was meant to. He loved her deeply, said a source close to him, and he'll always love her, just in a different way now. In the days following his performance, clips of that night spread online. Fans commented not on what he said, but on what he didn't. The world seemed to understand that his silence wasn't emptiness, it was emotion. The kind that doesn't need translation. And that's the thing about Keith. His music has always been a reflection of his soul. For years, his songs were love letters to Nicole, filled with gratitude and awe. He often spoke about how she grounded him, how she believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. Their love wasn't performative, it was real, imperfect, human. But just as love inspired his greatest songs, loss became the muse for his most honest ones. In one of his new unreleased tracks, a lyric reportedly goes, "Sometimes love leaves quietly, but it still leaves the light on." That line says everything. Because for all the heartbreak, there's still respect. There's still warmth. Two people who shared nearly 2 decades together can't erase that, and neither of them is trying to. While Keith found healing through music, Nicole was doing the same through reflection. Though they've chosen different paths, the parallel is undeniable. Two souls, processing the end of a love story in silence, grace, and art. Behind the scenes, they've kept things private for the sake of their family. There's no media war, no public bitterness, just mutual understanding. Friends say they still communicate when necessary, and that both are focused on protecting their children from the noise of public speculation. It's a rare kind of ending, one that honors what came before instead of tearing it down. Keith has always said that his biggest fear in life wasn't failure, it was letting down the people he loved. That's what makes this chapter so quietly heartbreaking. He didn't lose because of neglect or betrayal. He lost because life shifted. Because sometimes, even love can't fight the pull of different destinies. There's a certain kind of poetry in that. Two artists who built a home on love, now building peace on acceptance. Those close to Keith say that, despite the pain, he feels gratitude. Gratitude for the years they shared, the lessons learned, and the family they built. He said before that love is never wasted. And this, perhaps, is proof of that belief. On stage during another recent performance, he thanked his audience for sticking with him through everything. The crowd didn't need clarification. They knew. They cheered louder, not out of curiosity, but compassion. He smiled then, genuinely this time. A small, quiet smile that seemed to say, "I'm okay. I'll be okay." And maybe that's the real beauty of this ending. It's not a story of destruction, but of evolution. Nicole has found peace in her stillness. Keith has found solace in his sound. Both have chosen to move forward without resentment, without spectacle, without rewriting the love that once was. They were never about drama. They were about connection. And even in their parting, that connection remains, transformed but not erased. In Hollywood, where endings often turn into battles and breakups into headlines, theirs stands out for its quiet dignity. It's the kind of ending that reminds people love doesn't always need to last forever to be real. Sometimes it's enough that it existed, that it healed, that it taught. Keith's music in the coming months is expected to reflect this transition. Not heartbreak, but rebirth. Not bitterness, but understanding. And those who've heard early snippets say it's some of his most soulful work yet. A reflection of a man who's been humbled by love and softened by loss. Nicole, meanwhile, continues to thrive in her own way. Grounded, graceful, and endlessly resilient. She's not closing the door on love. She's simply walking through a new one. Their story isn't about two people who fell apart. It's about two people who loved deeply, grew fully, and chose peace over pride. And that might just be the most powerful kind of love there is. Because even though they've gone separate ways, their silence speaks of something most of us only hope to find. A love that ends, but never disappears. Maybe that's why Keith hasn't spoken publicly about the divorce. Maybe he doesn't need to. The music says it all. The pauses between his words, the tenderness in his tone, the way his voice cracks just slightly during a verse. That's where the truth lives. Sometimes silence is the most honest sound in the world. And in that silence, Keith Urban has found his peace. As the lights dimmed on his final encore that night, he stood still for a moment, eyes scanning the audience. He whispered a soft, "Thank you," strummed the last note, and walked off stage. No dramatic farewell, no grand statement, just a quiet exit. But the applause that followed him carried something profound. It wasn't just admiration for an artist. It was empathy for a man who had loved, lost, and chosen grace over bitterness. And somewhere in that audience, maybe someone understood that sometimes love doesn't end with fireworks. It ends in a whisper, in mutual respect, in silence that speaks louder than any song ever could. Keith's silence isn't emptiness. It's healing. It's love rewritten in a quieter language. And for both him and Nicole, that silence is the start of something new. In the weeks that followed Keith Urban's emotional return to the stage, silence continued to hang heavy between him and Nicole Kidman. Not in anger, but in quiet acknowledgement. Their story had reached its final act, and neither needed to narrate the ending out loud. Nicole's life began to move in a new rhythm. She was spotted in Los Angeles, walking with friends, smiling in a way that looked more peaceful than performative. Those close to her said she was rediscovering what it meant to live without being half of a headline couple. "She's lighter," one insider told a magazine. "For the first time in years, she's just Nicole, not Nicole and Keith." That distinction mattered, because for years, the two of them had been seen as the exception, the Hollywood marriage that somehow stayed intact. Red carpets, public declarations of love, and award show kisses had painted a picture of permanence. They seemed to defy the industry's reputation for fleeting unions. But what no one saw were the moments between the photographs, the nights spent apart, the strain of different careers, the tug of war between two people trying to protect something while the world kept watching. In interviews years earlier, Nicole had once said, "When you love someone deeply, silence can be just as powerful as words." At the time, she was talking about emotional understanding in a relationship. But now, those same words seem to take on new meaning. Because Keith's silence, the lack of statements, no interviews, no social media posts, wasn't avoidance. It was his way of protecting the story they'd shared. In a world where every breakup becomes content, he refused to turn their memories into a spectacle. That choice, in its own way, was an act of love. Behind closed doors, those who knew Keith said the separation hadn't been easy. He poured himself into music, spending long nights in his Nashville studio. His upcoming songs, insiders whispered, carried the weight of everything left unsaid, stories of devotion, regret, and release. "He's processing the only way he knows how," said a close friend, "through the songs." Meanwhile, Nicole was filming in London. On set, she kept her composure, but those who worked with her said there was a subtle shift. "She used to talk about Keith all the time," one crew member shared. "Now she doesn't mention him, but sometimes when we're shooting emotional scenes, she goes somewhere deep, somewhere real." It wasn't bitterness. It was acceptance. Their relationship had been built on intensity. Two people from different worlds, drawn together by a shared hunger for meaning. He, the country musician who wore his heart on his sleeve. She, the award-winning actress whose strength often came wrapped in vulnerability. Together, they had built a family, weathered addiction, distance, fame, and scrutiny. But like all things that burn bright, their story eventually softened into something quieter. Not resentment, but reverence for what once was. Friends say Nicole still speaks of Keith with warmth. "She'll always love him," one source explained. "It's just a different kind of love now, one that doesn't need to exist within a marriage." For fans, their split felt like a loss, as if something pure had been taken away from an industry known for chaos. But those closest to the couple knew that what ended wasn't a failure. It was a choice made with clarity. They had given each other everything they could, and now it was time to give each other space to grow apart. In her interviews following the divorce filing, Nicole chose her words carefully. She didn't point fingers or indulge speculation. Instead, she spoke about evolution, about the way life unfolds in chapters. "You can't hold on to what you've outgrown," she said softly in one sit-down conversation. "You have to let it breathe, even if it breaks your heart. Her maturity became her armor. She had lived through this before: heartbreak, reinvention, public scrutiny. But this time, she wasn't trying to prove anything. She wasn't trying to escape. She was simply moving forward. Keith, on the other hand, found his voice again through music. During one concert in Sydney, he paused mid-show and told the audience, "Sometimes you don't get to keep what you love, but you never stop being grateful for it." The crowd erupted in applause, and though he didn't mention Nicole's name, everyone knew who he meant. It was his way of saying goodbye, not with drama, but with grace. Hollywood reacted the only way it knows how, with fascination. Magazines speculated, talk shows analyzed, and social media buzzed with opinions. Some blamed fame, others distance. But those who truly understood love saw something else. Two people choosing peace over performance. One of Nicole's closest friends summarized it perfectly. It's not about who left or who hurt who. It's about realizing that even love stories can end beautifully if they're rooted in truth. That truth was evident in the way both of them handled the aftermath. Quietly, respectfully, without scandal or spectacle. They didn't erase each other from their lives. They simply redrew the lines. Keith continued to be a devoted father, often seen with their daughters, taking them to school, or spending weekends at home in Nashville. Nicole made sure to prioritize family above everything else, even flying back whenever she wasn't working, to make sure her children felt stability amid the change. In a world obsessed with public displays, their silence became the loudest message of all. Love can end and still leave no villains. Months later, Nicole attended an award ceremony in New York. When a reporter asked how she was doing, she smiled and said, "I'm finding joy again. In the small things, in quiet moments." That simple sentence spoke volumes. Because for all the glamour and heartbreak, Nicole's strength has always been in her ability to begin again. Every ending in her life, from her early marriage to her most recent one, has led to a deeper understanding of herself. And perhaps that's the point. When the lights fade, when the cameras turn away, when the noise settles, what's left is the person you've become through it all. For Nicole, that person is softer, wiser, freer. And for Keith, that person is humbler, grounded, and still guided by the music that saved him more than once. Their story isn't one of tragedy, it's one of transformation. Two people who once walked side by side, now walking in separate directions, carrying gratitude instead of regret. Sometimes, the most powerful love stories don't end with forever, they end with peace. Because silence in its purest form isn't emptiness, it's understanding. And in that silence, both Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban seem to have finally found themselves again. Hollywood has always been a stage where love stories are magnified, dissected, and rewritten for public consumption. But when Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban's 19-year marriage quietly came to an end, it was unlike anything the industry was used to. There were no bitter accusations, no cryptic social media posts, no legal leaks or drawn-out public feuds, just silence. And that silence spoke louder than any scandal could. At first, the entertainment world didn't know what to do with it. There was confusion, speculation, and even disbelief. For years, Nicole and Keith were considered the anomaly, the couple that somehow survived Hollywood's chaos. They were proof that fame didn't have to destroy love. Their red carpet, appearances, the way they looked at each other, the small gestures between them, it had all seemed so genuine. So, when the news broke, it didn't just shock fans. It rattled the illusion that even the most grounded celebrity marriages could last forever. Still, their breakup unfolded with an almost poetic grace. Nicole didn't issue a statement beyond what was legally required, and Keith never offered a public explanation. Instead, they each returned to their crafts, the very passions that first brought them together. Nicole was soon seen filming again, throwing herself into her next role, a story about loss, healing, and rebirth. People who worked with her described her as composed but introspective. She wasn't broken, one producer shared. She was processing. There was a stillness in her that you don't often see in this industry. It wasn't sadness, it was peace. Keith, on the other hand, returned to music with a quiet vengeance. He didn't address the divorce directly in interviews, but his performances began to carry a raw, stripped-down emotion. During one show in Tennessee, he dedicated a song to those learning how to let go with grace. The audience fell silent. It wasn't a performance, it was a confession. Hollywood, in its own way, respected them for it. Instead of the usual gossip storm, there was admiration for how both handled something so painful with dignity. In a world built on spectacle, their restraint felt radical. But behind the respect, there was also reflection. Their separation sparked a quiet conversation among their peers about the cost of longevity in a world that thrives on reinvention. How do you keep love alive when your life is constantly shifting under the weight of fame, travel, and time? How do you remain connected when every detail of your marriage becomes a headline? Friends close to Nicole say she had wrestled with those questions for years. She had given everything to the marriage: patience, love, faith, forgiveness. But at some point she realized that love alone wasn't enough to keep two people growing in the same direction. "She's always believed in commitment," one friend said, "but she's also learned that commitment to yourself has to come first." That realization became her anchor. While the tabloids tried to dig for drama, Nicole's focus shifted to her children and her craft. She began spending more time in Sydney, walking the beaches where she grew up, reconnecting with her roots. Those who saw her there described her as calm, centered, even joyful. It wasn't the joy of denial, it was the quiet contentment of someone who had survived the storm and found herself on the other side, still standing. Keith, too, began to evolve publicly. His music started leaning toward reflection, less radio polish, more soul. Listeners could sense the difference. The man who once sang about love's adrenaline was now writing about its aftermath, about letting go, about gratitude, about the kind of love that leaves scars and still deserves a thank you. "Heartbreak doesn't have to be destructive," Keith said during a backstage interview. "Sometimes it's just transformation in disguise." That quote went viral for a reason. It captured what so many felt about their split, that it wasn't the end of a fairy tale, but the continuation of two human stories, still unfolding. Fans reacted with empathy, not outrage. Instead of choosing sides, many wrote letters, messages, and social posts expressing admiration for how the couple handled it. "They showed us that love doesn't fail just because it ends," one fan wrote on X, formerly Twitter. "Sometimes love's greatest act is knowing when to let go." Over time, the conversation shifted from heartbreak to healing. Nicole became an emblem of resilience, a woman who had endured public scrutiny, divorce, and reinvention multiple times, yet still believed in love. Keith became a symbol of emotional maturity, a man who chose reflection over resentment. It's rare in Hollywood for a breakup to become an example of grace, but that's exactly what happened. Their silence, once interpreted as avoidance, revealed itself as something deeper: respect. Respect for what they had, and for the life they'd built together, even if it no longer fit the present. Months after the news broke, Nicole gave a rare, brief interview to a European outlet. When asked what she had learned from love, she smiled, thoughtfully before answering, "Love isn't about possession, it's about appreciation. You can love someone deeply and still know when it's time to walk away." Those words resonated far beyond celebrity culture. They struck at something universal, the quiet truth that endings aren't failures, they're transitions. For Keith, those transitions found melody. He released a song called Quiet Hearts, rumored to be inspired by his marriage. The lyrics spoke of two souls who met in fire, lived in song, and drifted apart in peace. When he sang it live, there was no sadness, only tenderness. The crowd didn't cheer right away. They just listened, and that was the beauty of it. For once, silence wasn't empty. It was full of understanding. As the months turned into a year, both Nicole and Keith appeared to find their footing in new ways. Nicole began developing a film about second chances, one that explored the meaning of love after loss. Keith focused on a charity tour benefiting mental health programs for artists. In separate ways, they were turning pain into purpose. And yet, neither erased the other. In interviews, they still spoke kindly, never rewriting their history. Their love story, once so public, became something private again, a memory both seemed to carry with quiet gratitude. Because maybe the truth about love isn't that it lasts forever, but that it changes form. Sometimes it becomes a song, sometimes a memory, sometimes a lesson. Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban's story reminds us that silence doesn't always mean absence. Sometimes it's the space where love continues, just differently. In an industry addicted to noise, they chose stillness. In a culture obsessed with winning, they chose grace. And in a world that often confuses endings with failure, they showed us something extraordinary: that even the quietest goodbye can still be a love story. Because love, at its most honest, doesn't always ask to be celebrated. Sometimes it just asks to be understood. And perhaps that's what makes their ending and their silence so unforgettable.